greeting once again, Gentleman Jim McFarland, the tailor, here with
Victoria Baylor, professional dressmaker. Hey guys.
Well, let me say this. You know, last week's segment we touched on some points. We got away from our elastic, and I'm curious to know some things about this because I never used this. So I'm going to be enlightened just like you guys. Wow, my wonderful dressmaker, Victoria Baylor, gives us an explanation on it.
Yes, indeed. So as mentioned last week, we are starting several different new segments, and we're going to put out a newsletter that will kind of introduce those to you. This is one of our newest ones. It's called 5 Things to Know. It takes any topic in sewing and breaks it down and gives you kind of 5 tidbits of information, kind of neat facts to know about it. This week, our culprit is clear elastic. And I'm sure those of you who probably are seasoned sewers use it, even beginner sewers use it. It's common knowledge. A lot of people have picked up the methods involved in how to use clear elastic.
I didn't.
Well, we have a classically trained tailor here. I don't know when they started manufacturing stuff, which is a good point. I meant to kind of get a little bit of history. We want to jump into utility. So I will do that. So 5 things to know about clear elastic. Most of you people know it because they use it in swimwear. I personally don't use it in swimwear. I kind of like the other rib type of elastic. But you can use clear elastic in swimwear. What I like to use it for is a stabilizer. So characteristically speaking, if you look at clear elastic, it's a little bit more difficult to stretch than what most people interpret elastic to be, and that gives it great stabilizing qualities. And by stabilizer, I'm referring to specific areas of the garment in which you want limited movement per se. That would be your neckline in your garment and along your shoulder seam. And they're specifically used, I think, more popularly in knits. So I don't know. I know Mr. Jim does a lot of knitwear. Well, you do knitwear sewing for some of your
but I've never used
clear elastic.
Never used it.
And most people will use Seams Great, or there's some other great stabilizers out there. Name a few, Mr. Jim, because I know you got them on top of your head.
No,
not at all.
I'm going to be very, very honest with you guys. From a tailoring perspective, we do things with our hands, and how we avoid the stretch on knits and stretchy fabrics. Our method is a little different, and maybe I'll speak on that one day.
Okay, so you see there's definitely a difference between the way a classically tailored master tailor actually stabilizes garments versus kind of how us dressmakers do it. And again, this is one of our tools, and as you can see, this is a knit dress I made a few years back. And I'll be able to show it up close a little bit later, but the clear elastic's along the neckline here, this V-neck. And as we all know, that's like the worst place where you can get drooping.
It really is.
Oh my gosh. There's many times where it will kind of wobble and weave, and to me that takes away from the allure of this beautiful neckline.
I like the way that's laying down like that.
Yeah, so that's exactly what the clear elastic achieves. It gives this nice tautness in the neckline and keeps any kind of bubbling or keeps it from laying flat up against your body per se. And then also the shoulder is another area where you want your garment to be stable.
It has a tendency, if you buy some garments, it tends to ripple up on the shoulder.
Exactly. And if you think about it, the weight of the garment comes from the shoulder. So if you're working with a slinky knit, especially those things are from the devil, slinky knits. But if you're working with a slinky knit and they're specifically heavy, if you don't stabilize a shoulder seam, you can end up having like your shoulder seam down here somewhere. It'll travel. It just will throw off the whole look of the garment. So definitely clear elastic makes for a great stabilizer. Again, I will demonstrate that a little bit later. I also like to use it to stabilize gathers.
That is something I didn't know. I like I say, I have a different method.
Yeah, so it's very cool. So usually, it's funny because I didn't always do that, but especially if you put gathers in a knit. So I have a dress, I didn't bring it, but there's some ruching down the side of the dress. And I mean, you can leave it as is, you can even serge on top of it, but a great way to ensure, especially when you're getting in and out of those garments, that it kind of bounces back and you're not stretching it too much, is to add clear elastic along that seam line. So that's a really, really good use for it too. Number 3 is that it can be a little bit tricky to handle for most people that haven't worked with it. It's one thing to know. I will get into the details about that when we do our table demonstration, but this stuff does stretch, and there's a certain way you need to handle it and sew it to ensure that you get success, and we'll talk about that. Also, it is cheaper to buy in bulk. That's number 4. So if you go to your local fabric store, sometimes you might end up paying 99 cents a yard for this. Well, you can get 5 yards for like $1, $2 if you buy online and stuff like that.
Oh, okay.
And it does come in 2 widths. So there's 3/8 of an inch, which is right here, and then there's 1/4 of an inch. And I tend to use 3/8 of an inch. And actually, Mr. Jim has seen this used very interestingly in some of the garments he's altered. Tell us about that, Mr.
I
Jim.
see it all the time. A lot of times, well, let me give you a for instance, especially in women's wear, in knits. A lot of times, women will come in and they will tell me about it's tight in this area here, the shoulder area. And once I turn it over and I see this elastic, I've noticed that, and this is something for you people who want to alter your things, you can take this, and it's usually stitched on the garment before the 2 pieces are put together. If you separate it, just separating it, it automatically releases that knit to where it's easier. So, because that kind of holds it, the stabilizing is good.
Yeah.
But sometimes, on some people, it's too tight. So it's too good.
Yeah.
And all you really have to do, sometimes you don't even have to let the garment out.
No.
Just
Nick it
cut
a little bit.
this off.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, it just springs loose.
And that's a good point to be made, because I have never witnessed it in the armhole, and personally I wouldn't put it in the armhole unless it was something I was trying to make a knit be really structured or really hold. This stuff is pretty tight. So
it really is.
Think about where you're going to place it, because that's kind of key. So anyway, we're going to go to the table. I will show you the easy way in which how you can add this to your shoulder and even your neckline, and I'll show you some tricks on how to handle it properly.
All right.
So we're at the table doing a quick little demonstration to show you how to actually use this clear elastic, which couldn't be simpler. Let's first start by giving you a little bit of a close-up view of this snakeskin dress, one of my favorite dresses that I made years ago, and how I use the clear elastic. And I hope you can see this okay. So this is the neckline of the dress. All right, so I'm just turning it around a little bit. So this is part of the neckline, and as you can see, I'm going to flip it inside. The clear elastic is under the seam here, so you can see maybe a little bit right there where it might stick out beyond the serge edged. But there it is. It's also in the shoulder seam, which is also right here. So you can see it's completely serged on top, and it's stabilizing. So watch, I'm going to give it a pull. Notice it is not moving, and that really isn't due so much to the serge edge, more so that's because even if you feel underneath, that is the elastic itself that's stabilizing the garment. And again, can't emphasize enough how important it is to stabilize that particular area. If you want your dresses, shirts, etc. to hang properly, it's important to do so. And let me show you a better view. A better view is actually this cute little cardigan I made a little while ago. It's really, really colorful. But let me show you where I stabilized in it. And I stabilized, let me rotate it. Okay. And as you can see, there's that same clear elastic in the shoulder seam. So I'm going to flip it out so you can see the outside. There's the lapel. Right here. A little bit of the collar. And then if you flip in with the shoulder, you can see the stitching right there. Oop, it got away from me. There we go. Right here. So as you can see, and I'm going to give it a little bit of a tug, that's really stable. Now look at the lack of stretch here versus the cardigan itself. See how stretchy this stuff is? It's pretty stretchy. So if you imagine if I hadn't stabilized the shoulder, my seam would be dripping off. My shoulder seam would be just dripping off my shoulder, which would really counteract the design of the cardigan itself. So anyhow, let me show you exactly how to use this stuff. I mentioned before that it can be really tricky to work with. So pretty simple though, once you know how to get started. Okay, so here's a close-up of a pattern piece. This is one of Mr. Jim's. It's actually a vest pattern. It's not your typical tissue paper pattern. This is more of a, it's one that's actually created and made out of oak tag, so it can, be resilient and not fall apart. But anyhow, there's the shoulder seam, and then this is the front angle of the vest itself. So I'm just using this as an example to show you how you should handle your clear elastic and how much you need. If whatever the length of the seam is, when you're working with clear elastic, you want to make sure you have more than what you need. So if you're going to add this to your, we're going to pretend that this is a pattern, but we're going to pretend that this is actually your piece that's ready to be sewn. So it's made out of fabric, but I'm just doing a demonstration on the pattern. So when you do work with this, you want to make sure you have more than enough that you need. So specifically, because when you go to sew it, this stuff has a habit of either starting to sew anything is usually tricky when you're using like an elastic. So to have it longer than that gives your machine something to grip hold to. So when you actually feed your garment through the machine, you actually capture your elastic and feed it very evenly. Another little tip is, if you have a problem sewing this down, is that you can start in the middle and then sew out and then turn your garment around and sew back in. What I usually like to do, believe it or not, is because it's clear, I like to denote where my seam is going to be. So I can grab a ruler, let me do that, and you can take either a piece of chalk, the kind we like to use, like Tailor's chalk, that kind of disappears. You can get rid of the mark, or you can use a disappearing ink pen, and you can just mark wherever your seam line is. If it's about 5/8, and I'm just going to eyeball this just for the sake of demonstration. Mark wherever your seam line is. Uh-oh, we have a resistant pen. Okay, I don't think this pen has had its coffee this morning. Anyway, there we go. I think we got a mark. Anyway, mark where the seam line is. It's still resistant. There we go. So you can see where the marking goes. And then you can take your clear elastic. You want to actually sew the middle of the elastic right on top of that seam line, and then that's captured, and you can sew that in like that. What I usually like to do is baste it in first. You can do that, or you can just go straight to your serger. To me, that's a little bit more control when I can actually baste in the seam. So I have my top pattern piece, my front piece, on top of my bottom piece, wrong sides together. Add your clear elastic, right center flush on that seam, and then you can either baste it in, and then after that you can serge over to create that nice serge edge you see right here. The thing is, this stuff does move, and it will stretch if you pull it, and you don't want it to stretch in any way whatsoever, because when it retracts, it's usually a really rough retraction, and it will cause your seam to buckle. And if you want your seam to remain flat, you want to handle it flat. So keep that in mind. And then the last thing is, if you have problems with actually feeding it through, especially if you're using just your regular conventional sewing machine, you can of course use a Teflon foot, which will glide easier on the slick surface than anything else. And then just to help you keep it straight, the reason I sew on top of my front pattern piece is pretty simple. So this is my logic. So you have your fabric, wrong sides together, you have your top seam, shoulder seam, and then you have your back. And never mind the curve here, this is a specialized tailored vest, so there's curvature there. Let's pretend this is straight and these are aligned. You sew on top. The reason I sew again on the top side of my pattern and I put the elastic on the top side is, when you go to actually serge this off, this elastic's in the middle of the seam. And if you can imagine, if you go to try to press this seam anyway, other than backwards, the elastic's going to cause it to buckle. So by sewing on top, when you go to cut it, serge the edge, and then you can press the seam backwards, it will actually lay flat because the elastic is there. Keep in mind, you cannot, at this point, once you add elastic, press that seam forward toward the front if that's what you were intending to do, because the bulk of the elastic in the seam will make it hard for it to lay down. So that's pretty much it. That's just a quick demonstration. This stuff is easy. It's like sewing through butter. It really isn't bad. Just remember, don't stretch it. Cut more than what you need. Sew it on top. And then if you need a little bit of extra insurance, baste it in. And then you can serge off. But it's pretty easy peasy after that.
Well, once again, I learned a lot, and I hope you guys did too, about using this clear elastic. Sometimes you have to experiment with things to see how they're going to work. Now, I'm going to experiment with clear elastic now because I really want to see if using the clear elastic, when I say helps me with the way I do it, I'm always open for learning. And because I've never used it, if I find out that it helps me, I'm switching. So, once again, this is Gentleman Jim, the tailor.
And Victoria Baylor Dressmaker. And this was our show, 5 things to know about clear elastic.
5 things.
And then we'll just go through that list real quick, just as a quick review. Remember, it's a great stabilizer for both necklines and shoulder lines. You can use it to stabilize gathers. It's a little bit tricky to handle, so make sure you follow some of the tips here in this video. In addition to, there's great ones on YouTube and other people's blogs. Lots to learn about it. Buy it in bulk if you need tons of it. It's a great staple to have in your sewing a toolkit. And then lastly, it comes in 2 widths, so you decide which you need. I always use the 3/8 inch for the seams, like my shoulder and then the neckline, but I imagine you could use the smaller lengths if you were doing a simple job, as Mr. Jim mentioned earlier, around kind of like the shoulder, or the shoulder seam. But be careful, don't stabilize things too much or it will impede movement. So that's our show for today. It was a pleasure seeing you guys.
See you again.
See you. And in closing, we always love to leave you a little bit of affirmation and thought. Remember, God created you to do amazing things.
Amazing.
Whether it is in sewing or any other thing, go on out there and do them.
There you go.
All right.
Thank
Take care.
you.
See you next week. Bye.